The sun beat down on the rocky slopes of Nexus 7, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. A wounded Kurlak's mother limped along the ridge, 3 cubs following close behind. Her scales, normally a vibrant blue-green, had dulled with injury and exhaustion. Blood dripped from a deep gash in her side where another Kurlax had attacked her during a territorial dispute. The mother stopped, turning to look at her cubs. 2 were strong, already showing the beginnings of armor plates along their spines. The 3rd was smaller, weaker, its breathing labored in the thin mountain air. The mother made a low, rumbling sound in her throat. Survival demanded hard choices. She nudged her stronger cubs forward with her snout and continued walking, leaving the weakest behind on a flat rock. The small cub cried out, a high-pitched sound that echoed across the valley. But the mother did not look back. The abandoned cub tried to follow, stumbling on unsteady legs, but fell after only a few steps. It cried again, but the only answer was the wind whistling through the rocks. As the sun climbed higher, the cub curled into a tight ball, its scaled hide offering little protection against the harsh elements. Hours passed, and the cub grew weaker, its cries becoming softer until they were barely audible. Jack Harlow wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the settings on his survey equipment. The readings from this area were unusual, suggesting mineral deposits that weren't on any of the official charts. He'd been working as an environmental surveyor for the Frontier Colonial Authority for nearly 7 years now, and he preferred the solitude of fieldwork to the crowded colonial settlements. The mountains of Nexus 7 were dangerous, but they were also peaceful in a way that soothed his troubled mind. "Let's run a scan on Sector 12 again," Jack said to the small drone hovering beside him. The drone beeped in acknowledgement and darted away, its sensors glowing blue against the reddish rocks. Jack checked his water supply and frowned. He'd need to find a stream soon if he wanted to make it back to his cabin without tapping into his emergency reserves. As he packed up his main equipment, Buzz returned, chirping urgently. "What is it?" Jack asked, looking up. The drone's behavior protocol only triggered this alert pattern for 2 things: dangerous predators or potential emergencies. Jack grabbed his pulse rifle and followed as Buzz led him around a large boulder and up a narrow path he hadn't noticed before. The path opened onto a small plateau, and Jack immediately saw what had triggered Buzz's alert. A small creature lay curled on a flat rock, its body rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jack approached cautiously, keeping his rifle ready. When he got closer, he froze. It was a Kurlax cub, one of the most dangerous predator species. On Nexus 7, adult Kurlax were known to attack mining operations and had killed several colonists in the outer territories. Colonial protocol was clear: Kurlax were to be avoided at all costs, and any encountered near settlements were to be eliminated. But this was just a cub, and clearly abandoned. Jack could see its ribs through the thin layer of scales, and its eyes were closed, crusted with something that looked like dried tears. "Scan for adult Kurlax in the area," Jack ordered Buzz. The drone swept the surrounding terrain, then gave the all-clear signal. Jack knelt beside the cub. Common sense told him to walk away. Colonial regulations explicitly forbade interference with indigenous predator species. The penalty for keeping a Kurlax was severe, immediate termination of employment and possible exile from all colonial territories. But something about the abandoned cub stirred memories Jack had tried to bury for years. Memories of loss, of being alone in an uncaring universe. "I must be losing my mind," Jack muttered as he carefully lifted the cub. It was lighter than he expected, and hot to the touch. Dehydration, probably. The cub's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing vertical pupils and amber irises, then closed again. It made no attempt to bite or scratch him, too weak to defend itself. Jack placed the cub in his pack, leaving it open enough for the creature to breathe. "Buzz, mark this location. We're heading back to the cabin." The drone beeped in confirmation. Though Jack could have sworn its tone sounded disapproving, the journey back to his cabin took longer than usual. Jack moved carefully to avoid jostling his unusual cargo and took a less direct route to minimize the chance of encountering anyone from the colony. Few people ventured this far into the mountains. but occasional patrol drones monitored the area for unauthorized mining operations and dangerous wildlife. The last thing Jack needed was to be caught with a Kurlax cub in his pack. By the time his cabin came into view, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples. The cabin was simple but sturdy, built to withstand the harsh weather of Nexus 7. Solar panels on the roof powered his equipment, and a small garden and a climate-controlled greenhouse provided fresh vegetables to supplement his supply rations. It wasn't much, but it was home. The only place Jack had felt safe since the accident that took his family 5 years ago. Jack entered the security code and stepped inside, immediately going to the small medical area he maintained for field injuries. He placed the cub on the examination table and instructed Buzz to scan its vital signs. The drone's readings appeared on Jack's tablet, showing severe dehydration and malnutrition, but no serious injuries. "Let's start with the basics," Jack said, filling a shallow dish with water. He dipped his fingers in the water and moistened the cub's mouth. At first, there was no response, but after a few attempts, the cub's small tongue darted out, licking the moisture from its lips. Encouraged, Jack continued, eventually coaxing the cub to drink directly from the dish, supporting its head as it lapped weakly at the water. Next came the challenge of food. Jack knew adult Kurlax were carnivores that hunted the large herbivores in the valleys, but he had no idea what their cubs ate. He searched his limited database for information on Kurlax, finding only warning notices and brief scientific observations. Nothing about their diet or care. "Guess we'll have to figure it out together," Jack told the cub as he prepared a mixture of protein supplement and softened ration meat. The cub sniffed the offering and turned away. Jack tried several more combinations before the cub showed interest in a paste made from protein supplements mixed with the synthetic bone marrow from his emergency rations. It ate a small amount before falling asleep again, its breathing stronger than before. Jack watched the sleeping cub, reality setting. And what was he thinking? This wasn't some stray pet from Earth. This was a Kurlax, a predator that would grow into a dangerous killer. The rational thing would be to put it back where he found it, or even to euthanize it humanely before it became a threat. But as Jack considered his options, the cub shifted in its sleep, making a small sound almost like a whimper. It reminded him of his daughter's nightmares, how she would call for him in the dark. The memory hit him like a physical blow, bringing with it all the grief he'd tried to outrun by coming to this remote planet. "Just until you're stronger," Jack said softly, knowing he was making a decision that could cost him everything. "Then we'll figure something out." Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin like a living thing. Jack secured the windows and doors, then set up a makeshift bed for the cub using an old storage container lined with soft packing material. He transferred the sleeping creature to its new bed, noticing the bright spots on its hide that reminded him of stars against the night sky. "Nova," he said quietly. "That's what I'll call you, just for now." It was a name from old Earth legends, stories his wife used to tell their daughter about stars being born in the depths of space. Jack hadn't spoken either of their names in years, but somehow, naming the cub made him feel connected to them again, as if they might approve of this small act of compassion in a harsh world. As Jack prepared for sleep, he set Buzz to monitoring mode, programmed to alert him if the cub's condition changed or if any other Kurlax approached the cabin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight he had done what he could. Jack fell asleep to the sound of Nova's steady breathing, unaware that his act of mercy had set in motion events that would change not only his life but the relationship between humans and Kurlax forever. Jack woke to a sharp pain in his hand. Nova had crawled out of the makeshift bed during the night and was now biting his fingers, her small teeth surprisingly sharp. He pulled his hand away, examining the shallow cuts that dotted his skin. "Nova," hissed, backing away to the corner of the room, her amber eyes never leaving him. Despite her weakened state, her instincts remained strong. She was still a wild predator, not a pet. "Hungry, huh?" Jack said, keeping his voice low and calm. He moved slowly to the food preparation area, aware of Nova watching his every move. The protein paste he had made yesterday was gone, so he prepared a larger batch, adding some nutrient supplements that might help her recovery. When he placed the bowl on the floor and stepped back, Nova approached cautiously, sniffing the mixture before eating with surprising speed. Jack used the opportunity to check his hand terminal. There were 2 messages from the colony outpost. The first was routine, a weather warning about an incoming storm system. The second made his heart beat faster. Susan Riley, the local colonial enforcement officer, was requesting a meeting to discuss irregularities in his supply requisitions. Jack swore under his breath. He had requested extra protein packs and medical supplies. Not thinking how it might look to colony administration, Nova finished eating and began exploring the cabin, sniffing at everything, occasionally trying to climb on furniture with her still unsteady legs. Jack watched her, trying to decide what to do. He needed to respond to Riley or she would become more suspicious, but he also needed to hide any evidence of Nova before anyone visited. The cabin was small, with few hiding places that would contain a curious predator cub. First things first, Jack muttered, sending a brief response to Riley suggesting they meet at the colony outpost in 3 days, claiming his current survey work could not be interrupted. It was a reasonable excuse that might buy him some time. Next, he turned his attention to Nova's care. The cub needed a secure space where she could stay when Jack was working or if anyone visited. Unexpectedly, Jack spent the morning converting a storage closet into a space for Nova. He removed the shelving and added soft bedding, a water dispenser, and enough room for the growing cub to move around comfortably. He installed a simple lock that could be operated from both sides, ensuring Nova couldn't escape but also wouldn't be trapped if an emergency occurred. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do for now. After finishing the modifications, Jack took Nova outside for the first time since bringing her home. He kept her close to the cabin, ready to grab her if she tried to run or if any wild Kurlax appeared. But Nova seemed content to explore the immediate area, sniffing at plants and rocks, occasionally digging in the soil with her small claws. Jack used the opportunity to observe her more closely. Her scales were gradually regaining their color, showing hints of the blue-green that was typical of Kurlax. The spots on her back that had reminded him of stars were more visible now, forming a pattern that Jack suspected might be unique to her, like a fingerprint. She moved with increasing confidence, her strength returning with proper nutrition. As Jack watched Nova, he realized he needed to learn more about Kurlax if he was going to keep her healthy and hidden. The colonial database had limited information, mostly focused on their threat level and how to avoid them. For more detailed knowledge, he would need to access the scientific research networks, which would require some creative computer work to avoid leaving a trail that might alert authorities. That evening, after Nova had eaten and fallen asleep, in her new space, Jack connected to the colony's data network through an encrypted channel. He had learned a few tricks during his years on frontier worlds, ways to access information without being tracked. It wasn't strictly legal, but neither was harboring a Kurlax cub. The scientific database contained more information than Jack had expected. Several xenobiologists had studied Kurlax from a distance, documenting their hunting patterns, social structures, and physical development. According to the research, Kurlax cubs stayed with their mothers for approximately 2 years, learning to hunt and establishing their place in the pack hierarchy. During this time, they transitioned from a diet of partially digested meat provided by adults to hunting small prey themselves. Jack downloaded as much information as he dared, then disconnected from the network. He now had a better understanding of what Nova needed, but the knowledge also brought new concerns. Kurlax were pack animals. Nova would be missing the socialization she would normally receive from her mother and siblings. Jack had no idea how this might affect her development or behavior. Would she see him as pack, or would her instincts eventually turn her against him? The next morning, Jack was awakened by strange sounds coming from Nova's room. He opened the door to find her making a series of clicks and rumbles, responding to similar sounds from outside the cabin. Jack froze. There were wild Kurlax nearby. Nova heard them and was trying to communicate. Jack checked the security feed from Buzz, who was stationed outside. The drone's camera showed no signs of Kurlax in the immediate vicinity, but they could Be just beyond the sensor range." He quickly closed Nova's door, muffling her calls, and grabbed his pulse rifle. After instructing Buzz to maintain surveillance, Jack cautiously stepped outside. The morning air was cool, the first light of dawn just beginning to illuminate the landscape. Jack scanned the ridge above his cabin, where the sounds seemed to be coming from. For several minutes, he saw nothing. Then a movement caught his eye. A large adult Kurlax stood on the ridge, its powerful body silhouetted against the sky. It made no move to approach, simply watching. After what felt like an eternity, the adult Kurlax turned and disappeared over the ridge. Jack returned to the cabin, his mind racing. Had the adult Kurlax been drawn by Nova's scent or calls? Was it her mother, searching for the abandoned cub? Or was it merely a coincidence, a predator passing through its territory? Whatever the reason, it confirmed Jack's worst fear: keeping. Nova would inevitably attract other Kurlax to his cabin. Inside, Nova was scratching at her door, making distressed sounds. When Jack opened it, she rushed past him to the cabin's main door, standing on her hind legs and pawing at it. She wanted to follow the adult Kurlax. Jack knelt beside her, gently pulling her away from the door. "You can't go out there, Nova," he said softly. "It's not safe for either of us." Nova turned to look at him, and for a moment Jack thought he saw understanding in her amber eyes. Then she bit his hand, harder than before, drawing blood. Jack didn't pull away this time. He remained still, letting her taste his blood, maintaining eye contact. It was a gamble based on the research he had read. Among Kurlax establishing dominance was essential, but so was demonstrating fearlessness and trust. After a long moment, Nova released his hand and made a soft rumbling sound in her throat. She backed away, then curled up on the floor, watching him. "We'll figure this out," Jack promised, more to himself than to Nova. He treated his wound, then sat at his computer terminal to review the information he had downloaded. According to the research, Kurlax cubs began their hunting training at around 6 months of age. Based on Nova's size and development, Jack estimated she was close to that age. She would soon need more than protein paste to eat, and she would need to learn skills that Jack wasn't sure how to teach. The next day passed without any sign of wild Kurlax, but Jack remained on high alert. He began modifying his daily routine to include activities that might help Nova develop naturally. He created simple puzzles for her to solve to get food, mimicking the problem-solving she would learn in the wild. He used Buzz to simulate prey movements, encouraging Nova to practice stalking and pouncing. Though still clumsy, she showed remarkable adaptability and intelligence, quickly learning the patterns in Jack's training games and adjusting her strategies. As the day for his meeting with Officer Riley approached, Jack became increasingly anxious. He had prepared his explanation for the supply requisitions and made sure Nova's room was as secure and soundproof as possible, but countless things could go wrong. Nova was becoming more vocal, more active, and more curious every day. Keeping her hidden during a visit would be challenging. The night before the meeting, Jack sat on the floor beside Nova, who had taken to sleeping near him rather than in her room. She had grown noticeably in just the few days since he had found her, her body already showing the beginning of the muscle definition that would one day make her a formidable predator. "Tomorrow's going to be tricky," Jack told her, gently stroking the scales along her back. Nova made a soft rumbling sound that Jack had come to recognize as contentment. In that moment, despite all the risks and uncertainties, Jack knew he couldn't give her up. Somehow, he would find a way to raise her safely, to give her a chance at life that her own kind had denied her. And perhaps, in doing so, he might find healing for his own abandoned heart. 6 months passed since Jack found Nova on the rocky slopes of Nexus 7. The small, weak cub had grown into a juvenile Kurlax, now reaching Jack's knee in height and showing the beginning of the armor plates that would eventually cover her back and sides. Her blue-green scales gleamed with health, and the star-like spots that gave her her name had become more prominent, forming a unique pattern across her back. Nova no longer fit in the storage room Jack had converted for her, so he had rearranged the cabin, reinforcing one section with metal panels to create a larger space that could withstand her increasing strength. Jack's meeting with Officer Riley had gone better than expected. He had explained his increased supply requests as necessary for extended survey work in the more remote regions, and she had seemed to accept his explanation. But Jack knew he was living on borrowed time. As Nova grew, hiding her would become increasingly difficult. Already, she needed more food than his regular supply allotment provided, forcing him to hunt the local wildlife to supplement her diet. Today, Jack was preparing to teach Nova another hunting lesson. Over the months, he had developed a training program based on what he had learned about Kurlak's behavior. Using buzz to record wild Kurlaks from a safe distance, Jack had observed how adult Kurlaks taught their young to hunt, and he mimicked these techniques as best he could. Ready for today's lesson? Jack asked, picking up a training dummy he had made from local animal hides, stuffed with sensors that would record Nova's bite strength and attack patterns. Nova watched him with intelligent eyes, already understanding the routine. When Jack activated the dummy's simple movement mechanism, Nova dropped into a hunting crouch. Her muscles tensed for action. Jack released the dummy, which began moving in an erratic pattern across the clearing behind his cabin. Nova waited, tracking its movements, showing more patience than she had in earlier training sessions. When the dummy changed direction suddenly, coming closer to her hiding spot, Nova exploded into action. Her speed was impressive, closing the distance in seconds. She struck the dummy with precision, her developing jaws clamping down on what would be the neck of a real prey animal. The sensors in the dummy recorded the data to Jack's tablet. He reviewed the information with a mixture of pride and concern. Nova's bite force had increased by 20% since the last test, and her attack strategy showed clear signs of learning and adaptation. She was developing exactly as she should, which meant she was becoming more dangerous every day. "Good job, Nova," Jack called, approaching carefully. Early in their training, Nova had been reluctant to release her prey, showing the possessive behavior typical of wild Kurlaks. It had taken weeks of patient work to teach her to share her kills, a behavior Jack knew would be crucial if he was ever going to integrate her into human society in any way. Nova looked up at Jack's approach but didn't release the dummy. She made a low growling sound in her throat, not aggressive but assertive. Jack stopped, maintaining eye contact. "Nova, release," he said firmly. For a moment, Nova's grip tightened on the dummy. Then, slowly, she opened her jaws and backed away, allowing Jack to retrieve the now punctured training tool. "Good girl," Jack said, removing a piece of fresh meat from his pack and tossing it to her. Nova caught it midair and swallowed it in one gulp, then looked expectantly for more. Jack laughed, tossing her another piece. "That's all for now. You'll get the rest at dinner." As they walked back to the cabin, Jack noticed Nova repeatedly looking toward the mountains, her head tilted as if listening. He followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. Still, he had learned to trust Nova's senses, which were far more acute than his own. "What is it, girl?" he asked as Nova made a series of clicking sounds followed by a low rumble, a vocalization Jack had come to recognize as her way of communicating about other Kurlaks. Over the months, Jack had documented over 30 distinct sounds that Nova used, each seemingly with its own meaning. It was far more complex communication than the colonial scientists had ever attributed to the species. "Are there others nearby?" Jack asked, raising his pulse rifle and scanning the ridge. Nova continued making the sounds, becoming more agitated. Jack whistled for Buzz, who had been patrolling the perimeter. The drone returned quickly, and Jack checked its surveillance feed. The thermal imaging showed nothing in the immediate area, but at the edge of its range, there was movement. Several large heat signatures were moving along the ridge, following a path that would bring them closer to the cabin. "Inside now," Jack said, ushering Nova toward the cabin. She resisted briefly, clearly interested in the approaching Kurlaks, but eventually followed Jack inside. He secured the reinforced door and activated the cabin's defense system, a precaution he had installed shortly after bringing Nova home. The system wouldn't stop a determined Kurlak's pack, but it would give warning and perhaps deter them. Inside, Nova paced restlessly, continuing to make the clicking and rumbling sounds. She scratched at the door, then moved to the window, standing on her hind legs to look outside. Jack watched her behavior with growing fascination. She wasn't showing fear or aggression, but rather what appeared to be curiosity and excitement. It was almost as if she recognized the approaching Karlax in some way. "Do you know them?" Jack asked, not expecting an answer. To his surprise, Nova turned to look at him, then made a specific series of sounds that he had never heard before. She repeated the sequence, looking from Jack to the window and back again, as if trying to make him understand something important. Jack moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight from outside. Through Buzz's feed, he could see that the Karlax were now at the edge of the clearing. There were 4 of them, all adults, their massive bodies covered in armor plates that glinted in the sunlight. They moved with a coordinated precision that spoke of intelligence and social organization, far beyond what colonial science acknowledged. The largest Karlax, clearly the leader, approached the center of the clearing and raised its head, making a loud, complex series of sounds. Nova immediately responded, her calls matching the pattern but in a higher pitch. The exchange continued for several minutes. The wild Karlax and Nova seemingly engaged in a conversation that Jack could only witness, not understand. Eventually, the lead Karlax made one final call, then turned and led the others back toward the mountains. They disappeared into the tree line, leaving no sign of their presence except for the large footprints in the soft earth of the clearing. Jack released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What was that about?" he asked Nova, who had finally stopped her vocalizations and seemed calmer. She looked at him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Jack once again had the distinct impression that she was trying to tell him something important. The complexity of her behavior and communication continued to surprise him, challenging everything the colony believed about Karlax intelligence. Later that evening, as Jack was reviewing the recording of the encounter, his communication system chimed with an incoming message. It was from Officer Riley, and the content made Jack's blood run cold. There had been reports of unusual Karlax activity in his sector, and a security drone had captured footage of Karlax approaching his cabin. Riley was organizing a sweep of the area, including a thorough inspection of all outposts and cabins. She would be arriving at Jack's location in 2 days. Jack sat back, his mind racing. There was no way he could hide Nova during a thorough inspection, and the penalties for harboring a Karlax were severe. He considered his options. He could release Nova back into the wild, but after 6 months of human care, she might not survive, especially if the wild Karlax rejected her. He could attempt to relocate, taking Nova to one of the unmapped valleys beyond colonial jurisdiction, but that would mean abandoning his life and work. Becoming a fugitive. As Jack struggled with his decision, Nova approached, sensing his distress. She pressed her head against his hand, making the soft rumbling sound that Jack had come to associate with affection. In that moment, Jack realized he had already made his choice the day he found her abandoned on that rocky slope. He couldn't give her up. "We'll find a way," he promised, stroking the scales along her neck. "Somehow, we'll find a way." That night, as Jack lay awake planning their next move, Nova suddenly raised her head, her body tensing. She made a low warning sound, the one she used when sensing danger. Jack sat up, reaching for his pulse rifle. "What is it?" he whispered. "Nova." Moved to the window, her attention fixed on something outside. Jack joined her, peering into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then, at the edge of the clearing, illuminated by Nexus 7's 3 moons, stood the lead Karlax from earlier that day. It was alone this time, and it was staring directly at the cabin. As Jack watched, the Karlax lowered its head and made a deliberate marking on the ground with its claws. It then looked up at the cabin again, made a single, clear vocalization, and disappeared into the night. Jack turned to Nova, who was making the same vocalization in response. Whatever communication was happening between Nova and the wild Karlax, it was becoming increasingly clear that it was more complex and purposeful than anything colonial science had ever documented. And somehow, Jack knew it would change everything. The morning before Officer Riley's inspection, Jack woke early and began implementing his plan. He had spent the previous day preparing a hidden space beneath the cabin's floor, reinforcing it and adding basic ventilation. It wasn't ideal, but it might be enough to keep Nova concealed during a routine inspection. The bigger challenge would be convincing Nova to stay quiet while strangers were in the cabin. "This is important, girl," Jack said as he showed Nova the hidden compartment. She sniffed at it cautiously, clearly not enthusiastic about the confined space. Jack placed some of her favorite treats inside, encouraging her to enter. Nova looked at him with what he could only describe as skepticism, but eventually went in, lured by the food. Jack practiced opening and closing the hidden door several times, making sure Nova understood she needed to stay inside until he released her. After the training session, Jack took Nova for a final run in the forest before the inspection. They needed to be careful as colonial drones were likely already increasing surveillance in the area, but Nova needed to burn off energy if she was going to remain calm in hiding. They stayed close to the cabin, within the area where Jack had disabled the official surveillance systems months ago. As they moved through the trees, Jack noticed Nova was behaving oddly. She kept stopping to make markings on the ground, similar to what the lead Karlax had done outside the cabin. When Jack examined the markings, he saw they formed specific patterns, clearly intentional rather than random scratching. He took photos with his handheld device, determined to decode what appeared to be a form of communication. They returned to the cabin by midday, and Jack spent the afternoon removing any obvious signs of Nova's presence. He stored her food and toys in the hidden compartment, cleaned away shed scales, and arranged his equipment to cover the reinforced area he had built for her. When he was satisfied with his preparations, he activated Buzz to patrol the perimeter and alert him if anyone approached. "Tomorrow will be tricky," Jack told Nova as they shared a quiet dinner. "When Riley and her team arrive, you'll need to stay hidden and completely silent no matter what happens." Nova watched him as he spoke, her amber eyes focused on his face, as if understanding every word. Over the months, Jack had become convinced that she comprehended far more than anyone would believe possible for a Kurlax. He had documented countless examples of problem-solving, learning, and what appeared to be abstract thinking. Nova wasn't just a clever animal. She was intelligent in a way that challenged the very categories humans used to separate themselves from other species. As night fell, Jack made one final check of their preparations, then settled down to rest. He would need to be alert and calm for Riley's inspection. Nova curled up beside his bed as usual, her breathing deep and rhythmic in the quiet cabin. Jack was almost asleep when Nova suddenly raised her head, making a soft alert sound. A moment later, Buzz sent an alert to Jack's device. Something was approaching the cabin. Jack grabbed his pulse rifle and checked the surveillance feed. What he saw made him freeze. The large Kurlax leader from the previous day was approaching the cabin alone, moving with deliberate care to avoid triggering the perimeter sensors. Jack watched as the Kurlax stopped at the edge of the clearing and made a series of markings on the ground, similar to the ones Nova had been making in the forest. Then the Kurlax looked directly at the cabin, as if it knew exactly where the surveillance was located, and made a complex series of vocalizations. Nova immediately responded, moving to the door and making similar sounds. She scratched at the door, clearly wanting to go outside. Jack hesitated. Everything he knew about Kurlax suggested this could be dangerous, possibly a trap. But everything he had learned from Nova over the past months told him something else was happening here. Something unprecedented. "This is crazy," Jack muttered as he made his decision. He opened the door, pulse rifle ready, and stepped outside with Nova at his side. The large Kurlax remained at the edge of the clearing, watching them with intelligent eyes that reflected the moonlight. Nova made a series of sounds, and to Jack's astonishment, the wild Kurlax responded with what seemed like the same pattern, only deeper and more resonant. Nova looked at Jack, then back at the wild Kurlax, and began moving forward. Jack followed cautiously, his rifle ready but pointed downward. As they approached, the wild Kurlax lowered its massive head, bringing it closer to Nova's level. The two Kurlax began an exchange of sounds and small movements that Jack could only interpret as a conversation. After several minutes, the wild Karlax turned its attention to Jack, studying him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Slowly, deliberately, the Karlax used its claw to make a marking on the ground, then looked at Jack expectantly. Jack glanced at Nova, who made an encouraging sound. Taking a deep breath, Jack knelt and traced the same pattern in the dirt. The Karlax made a sound Jack had never heard before, almost like satisfaction, then added another marking to the pattern. Jack repeated it, and they continued this exchange for several more patterns. Jack realized with growing excitement that he was engaged in a form of communication with the wild Karlax, using Nova as a bridge between their species. The implications were staggering. If Karlax possessed this level of intelligence and communication ability, the entire colonial approach to them as dangerous predators to be avoided or eliminated was fundamentally wrong. The session ended when Buzz sent another alert to Jack's device. The drone had detected a colonial patrol vessel approaching the sector. The wild Karlax seemed to sense the change in Jack's demeanor and looked toward the sky, making a short, sharp sound that Nova immediately echoed. Without further interaction, the wild Karlax turned and disappeared into the forest with surprising speed for its size. Jack and Nova hurried back to the cabin, Jack's mind racing with what had just occurred. He needed to document everything, to understand what the markings meant and how this communication system worked. But more urgently, he needed to prepare for Riley's inspection tomorrow, which now seemed even more dangerous. If Riley discovered not only that Jack was harboring a Karlax, but also that he was communicating with wild ones, the consequences would be severe. That night, Jack could barely sleep, his thoughts alternating between excitement at the scientific discovery and fear of what tomorrow might bring. When morning came, he was already awake, making final preparations. Nova seemed to sense his anxiety and was unusually quiet and cooperative as he showed her once more how to enter the hidden compartment and remain silent. Just for a few hours, Jack promised as he prepared to close the compartment. Then we'll figure out what to do next. Nova made a soft rumbling sound and settled down on the bedding Jack had placed inside. He closed the hidden door just as Buzz alerted him to an approaching vehicle. Jack took a deep breath, composed himself, and went to the cabin door. Through the window, he could see a colonial enforcement vehicle stopping in the clearing. Officer Riley stepped out, followed by 2 armed security personnel. Their presence was unusual for a routine inspection, suggesting Riley suspected something more serious than supply irregularities. "Officer Riley," Jack called, stepping outside to greet them. "I wasn't expecting such a formal visit." He kept his tone casual, though his heart was pounding. Riley was a tall woman with short gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent years on frontier worlds. She studied Jack with sharp eyes that missed little. "Harlow," she acknowledged. "We're conducting security sweeps of all outposts in this sector. There's been unusual Karlax activity reported, including some near your cabin." Jack nodded, trying to appear appropriately concerned rather than guilty. "I've noticed increased activity on my perimeter sensors. That's why I increased my security measures recently." "Yes, I saw that in your requisition requests," Riley said, "along with some other interesting items. Mind if we take a look inside?" It wasn't really a question. Jack stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Of course, though I'm not sure what you expect to find." The inspection began methodically, the security personnel scanning each room with handheld devices designed to detect various biosignatures, including those of known predator species. Jack watched, maintaining a calm facade while internally calculating how long Nova's hiding place would remain undetected. The standard scanners had limited penetration through the floor materials he had used, but if they brought in more sophisticated equipment, it would only be a matter of time. Riley herself seemed more interested in Jack's research data than searching for hidden predators. She browsed through his survey files, pausing occasionally to ask questions about his findings and methodologies. Jack answered truthfully where he could, deflecting when necessary. The conversation felt like a chess match, each probing for the other's true intentions. "You've been out here alone for quite some time, Harlow," Riley commented as the security team continued their search. Most surveyors request rotation back to the colony after a year or two. You've been here nearly 7 now. Jack shrugged. I prefer the solitude. It helps me focus on my work. Riley studied him for a moment. And what exactly is your work these days? Your reports have become increasingly vague over the past 6 months? Jack raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. Officer Riley, wait, this isn't what you think. Let me explain before you do anything. His voice was calm despite the fear gripping his chest. Riley kept her weapon trained on the floor where the security officers were preparing to open the hidden compartment. You're harboring a Kurlax, Harlow. That's a Class 1 violation of colonial regulation. There's no explanation that changes that. Please, Jack said, taking a careful step forward. Just let me show you. She's not dangerous. As if understanding the situation, Nova had fallen silent again, but the damage was done. The officers had located the hidden door and were working to open it. She? Riley's eyebrow raised. You've named it? Jack nodded. Her name is Nova. I found her abandoned as a cub 6 months ago. She would have died if I hadn't taken her in. He paused, then added, and she's not just an animal. Riley, Kurlax are intelligent, far more than colonial science has recognized. They have language, social structures, problem-solving abilities. I've documented everything. Riley's expression showed skepticism, but something in Jack's tone made her hesitate. Before she could respond, the security officers succeeded in opening the hidden compartment. Nova was inside, crouched low, her amber eyes reflecting the light. She made no aggressive moves, simply watching the humans cautiously. Don't hurt her, Jack pleaded. Let me show you what I've learned. He moved toward his computer terminal, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Riley nodded permission, though she kept her weapon ready. Jack pulled up the files he had been compiling over the months, video evidence of Nova's intelligence, and the recent interactions with wild Kurlax. I've been documenting everything, Jack explained as he showed them footage of Nova solving increasingly complex puzzles, learning commands, and most importantly, the communication exchange with the wild Kurlax. Last night, I made direct contact with a wild Kurlax through Nova. We established rudimentary communication. Do you understand what this means, Riley? They're not just predators. They're a sentient species. Riley watched the footage with increasing surprise. The security officers had their weapons trained on the compartment where Nova remained, but their eyes kept darting to the screen, clearly affected by what they were seeing. Even if what you're showing us is true, Riley said finally, it doesn't change the fact that you violated colonial law by harboring a predator species. This Kurlax will need to be removed and studied in a controlled environment. No, Jack said firmly. That would be a mistake. Nova trusts me, and I've established a connection with the wild Kurlax through her. If you take her away, we lose our first real chance to understand the species and establish peaceful contact. Riley frowned. That's not my decision to make. Harlow, protocol is clear. Then contact someone who can make that decision, Jack suggested. There must be scientists in the colony who would be interested in this discovery. Someone who would understand its importance. Riley considered this for a moment, then gestured for one of the officers to approach. They spoke quietly, and the officer left the cabin. Jack used the opportunity to speak directly to Nova, who was still watching from the hidden compartment. It's okay, girl. Come out slowly. Jack kept his voice gentle, trying to project calm despite the tension in the room. Nova hesitated, then carefully emerged from the compartment. The remaining security officer tightened his grip on his weapon, but Riley raised a hand, signaling him to hold. Nova stood in the center of the room, her posture non-threatening, looking from Jack to the strangers. To everyone's surprise, she made a series of sounds, the same pattern Jack had heard her use with the wild Kurlax. Then she approached Jack's computer terminal and used her claw to scratch a pattern on the floor beside it, similar to the markings the wild Kurlax had made. She's trying to communicate, Jack said softly. She knows something important is happening. Riley stared at Nova, her professional detachment clearly shaken by the Kurlax's behavior. I've never seen anything like this, she admitted. All our briefings describe them as mindless predators. Those briefings are wrong, Jack said. And if we continue treating them as animals to be avoided or eliminated, we're making a terrible mistake. One that could lead to conflict instead of understanding. The cabin fell silent as they waited for the officer to return. Nova remained close to Jack, occasionally making soft sounds or looking toward the door, as if expecting something. Jack wondered if she somehow sensed what was happening, if her connection to the wild Kurlax was stronger than he realized. Nearly an hour passed before the security officer returned, accompanied by an older man Jack didn't recognize. The man wore the uniform of the Colonial Science Division, with insignia indicating a senior position. He entered the cabin and immediately focused on Nova, his expression a mixture of scientific curiosity and caution. Dr. Alan Peters, the man introduced himself. I'm the lead xenobiologist for this sector. Officer Davis here tells me you've made quite a discovery, Mr. Harlow, Jack nodded. I've been caring for Nova for 6 months, documenting everything. She's intelligent, Dr. Peters, and so are the wild Kurlax? They have language, social organization, problem-solving abilities far beyond what's in the colonial records. Peters approached slowly, studying Nova with keen interest. May I? He asked, gesturing toward Jack's computer. Jack nodded and Peters began reviewing the files, occasionally making notes on his own device. His eyebrows rose higher with each video he watched. This is extraordinary, he said finally. If these observations are accurate, they completely contradict our understanding of Kurlax cognition. And these communication attempts with wild specimens. He trailed off, shaking his head in amazement. It's all accurate, Jack assured him. And there's more. Last night I participated in a direct communication exchange with a wild Kurlax. They're using a system of markings combined with vocalizations. I believe it's a complete language, one we might be able to decode with Nova's help. Peters turned to Riley. Officer, I'm invoking scientific discovery protocol on this matter. Mr. Harlow and the Kurlax specimen will remain here under observation rather than being removed. This discovery warrants full investigation before any further action is taken. Riley frowned. Doctor, with all due respect, regulations regarding predator species are very clear. And the scientific discovery protocol supersedes those regulations when a finding of this magnitude is involved? Peters countered firmly. I'll take full responsibility. This could change our entire approach to Kurlax territories and save lives on both sides. Before Riley could respond, Nova suddenly raised her head, making a series of urgent sounds. Jack recognized the alert pattern she used when other Kurlax were nearby. Moments later, Buzz sent an alert to Jack's device, confirming multiple large biosignatures approaching the cabin. We have company, Jack said, checking the feed. What he saw made his heart race. At least a dozen wild Kurlax were emerging from the tree line, led by the large one Jack had communicated with the previous night. They formed a semicircle at the edge of the clearing, making no aggressive moves but clearly focused on the cabin. They're here for Nova, Jack realized aloud. Somehow they know she's in danger. Peters moved to the window, staring in amazement at the gathered Kurlax. This is unprecedented. A coordinated response to a perceived threat to one of their own. He turned to Riley. Do you see now? This is not animal behavior. This is organized, purposeful action by a sentient species. Riley looked from the window to Nova, then back to Jack. Her hand had moved away from her weapon, and her expression had shifted from suspicion to uncertain wonder. What do we do now? She asked, deferring to Peters. We take a risk, Jack suggested. We go out there and try to communicate. Show them we're not a threat to Nova. It might be our only chance to establish peaceful contact. Peters nodded slowly. I agree. But carefully, and only those necessary, Mr. Harlow, since you've already established some communication, you should lead. I'll accompany you to document. Officer Riley, perhaps you should join us as the Colonial Authority representative. Riley hesitated, then nodded. The rest of you stay here but remain alert, she ordered her officers. No aggressive actions unless directly threatened. Jack knelt beside Nova. "Ready to see your friends again?" he asked softly. Nova made the rumbling sound he associated with contentment and moved toward the door, clearly eager to go outside. The small group exited the cabin slowly, Nova walking between Jack and Peters, with Riley a step behind. The wild Kurlax watched their approach, their powerful bodies tensed but not threatening. The lead Kurlax stepped forward, its amber eyes fixed. First on Nova, then on Jack. Nova made a series of sounds, and the lead Kurlax responded with similar vocalizations. Then, to everyone's amazement, the large predator lowered its massive head and used its claw to make a pattern of markings on the ground. Jack recognized it as similar to the pattern from their previous exchange. "He wants us to respond," Jack sighed quietly. He knelt and traced the same pattern in the dirt. The lead Kurlax made a sound Jack interpreted as approval, then added to the pattern. Peters was recording everything, his scientific objectivity temporarily overwhelmed by the wonder of the moment. "They're testing us," Peters whispered.